And as promised, Representative Stephanie Herseth of South Dakota is here to talk with us about biofuels. And to start our conversation, I'd like to share with you and the audience this piece from the New York Times today. Gas prices unlikely to drop soon, energy officials say. House Energy Committee heard few encouraging words about high gasoline prices on Wednesday as a senior Energy Department official testified that prices at the pump are unlikely to recede soon. You're arguing that biofuels can have a role to play in that. What's your argument?
Well, this is a tremendous opportunity to take the understandable anxiety that American consumers have at the pump about the impact this has on their family budgets in the upcoming months throughout the rest of the year in light of those projections, and to take advantage of the existing energy infrastructure and the synergies and advancing technologies and what's going on in the country right now, particularly in rural America, to indeed reach the goal of energy independence within 10 years. And I think we have a way to do that and start opening the floodgates with biofuels, not just corn-based ethanol, which has led the way to where we are now to take advantage of this opportunity, but ethanol derived from other feedstocks like cellulosic ethanol. And we can talk a little bit about cellulosic ethanol if you're inclined, but we also have to look at not just expanding the production of ethanol and the distribution, as we've seen the oil industry make this transition. Right now, they were prepared to do it. We don't have any problems with supply. That's not the cause of the rising prices at the gas pump. Ethanol is the answer to moderating these prices and to reaching energy independence at the same time that we give incentives to the automakers in Detroit, as they're already doing. You can't watch TV without seeing an ad for flex fuel vehicles and what GM and Ford are trying to do to give consumers the choices that they're wanting in the market for flex fuel vehicles, as well as incentives to ensure that more gas stations across the country can carry those biofuels.
What kind of a regulatory or legislative framework are needed to make the use of biofuels actually efficient cost-wise at the pump?
Well, we have to pick up the pace here. We've seen, we had a good first step last year in the Energy Policy Act of 2005 to include an historic renewable fuels standard. And what we need to do is make that more aggressive, to tie it not just to a raw number of what we want to achieve, 7.5 billion gallons by 2012, which was a great first step, as I mentioned, but tie the use of biofuels to the increasing percentage of fuels sold in the country. Again, a more aggressive renewable fuels standard with a sub-percentage of that standard dedicated to ethanol derived from cellulosic sources to take advantage of emerging technologies that also increase the energy balance and the efficiencies of what we can produce through cellulosic sources, and a specific carve-out for biodiesel. This is another biofuel that we have to extend some tax incentives to make sure that it has the same certainty that ethanol has had, but we need to go beyond 2008 for biodiesel, 2010 for ethanol, extend that out to 2015, which gives the investors the certainty, the manner in which they can get a percentage of the market share. And biodiesel and gasoline, they're two very independent markets. They're derived from different feedstocks, so we think that it's important to have a separate renewable fuel standard for biodiesel.
So just to understand, right now the standards are fixed no matter how great the consumption goes, and you're suggesting essentially prorating it so that when consumption goes up, the standards of requirement of use goes up as well.
That's exactly right.
Okay.
Well, I appreciate the call and the question. I share your frustration. I think many people do, and I think that what's happening in Brazil is starting to get more attention in the media and among American consumers, and asking the same questions you're asking. Why didn't we make this transition 30 years ago the way Brazil did? And I think the answer is you have to have working in tandem producers, and in Brazil they have producers of sugarcane, the industry, the auto industry, as well as government involvement. You can't dismiss the fact that Brazil made some tough political decisions 20 and 30 years ago to advance biofuels in their economy to reach a state of energy independence today. That's why it's important that in a bipartisan manner we take this advantage and this opportunity right now to reach the same goal, and we can reach it sooner than some people think if we get all of the stakeholders working in tandem with incentives, with requirements. We've already seen the market starting to respond, but we have to pick up the pace for exactly the reasons that you described as it relates to instability in other regions of the world where we're currently dependent on that foreign oil.
How long would it take the United States to get to the point that Brazil is at today?
Well, the estimates vary. You have individuals like Vinod Khosla, the founder of Sun Microsystems, who has created so many jobs in this country over the past many years, who has done the research and feels that if we make the right commitment, an aggressive commitment, and have the kind of cooperation that I think we can achieve, given the synergies that are out there and the political will, I think we can do this, certainly within 10 years. His estimates are even more optimistic. But this is something that's truly aspirational. In the early 1960s, at the beginning of that decade, JFK gave the speech referred to as the moonshot. We had just put someone in space, hadn't even orbited the Earth, and he said we're going to put a man on the moon by the end of the decade, and we did it. There is no reason that in 2006 we can't have the same aspirational goals that we had decades ago. Well, that's a good question about cellulosic sources of ethanol. And we have the ability across the country in every region. We already have 9 states that have ethanol plants in operation, 19 states, excuse me. This isn't just the upper Midwest, although it's concentrated there, but we have ethanol plants operating in 19 states, including California and New Jersey, increasingly biorefineries being constructed in the South. But we have a whole host of crops, native prairie grasses, other things that farmers can grow that haven't been outlawed, that haven't been classified as illegal substances for reasons that we don't need to explore here. So I know that the caller raised one of those, but let's look at cellulosic sources from prairie switchgrasses, from certain agricultural waste like corn stover, wheat straw and rice straw. And there is enormous potential, but I think what the caller's getting at is we have emerging technologies, and what we're seeking to do is, again, make other investments in other technologies to increasingly increase the production efficiencies, the engine technology that can be built around, say, E85, which is an 85% blend of ethanol, 15% gasoline, to make sure that we're increasing the performance standard of these vehicles as well. Cellulosic ethanol is right around the corner based on emerging technologies that are available to us today. Thank you for the question and the comment. And again, I can sense your frustration, and I share it as it relates to the decades in which the oil industry has been subsidized, and the record profits that they're posting at the time that you and your family and others across the country are experiencing record prices at the pump, and the impact that that has on your family economics. I think that we can beat the oil companies on this one. And keep in mind, this is in some ways to their advantage as well, and some of them, not all, are recognizing that. But you have a bipartisan commitment, I believe, based on statements from the administration, based on farm state legislators, Republican and Democrat alike, but most importantly, as you pointed out in your question, a commitment by Democratic leadership in the event that we take over leadership in the House through the innovation agenda to reach energy independence within 10 years through a commitment, a true commitment to biofuels. The time is right. The opportunity we have here and the political will that I mentioned is right not only for energy independence and our national security, but also for our rural economies across the country and for the environment. The benefits of ethanol, biodiesel, and other biofuels and the emerging technologies in creating jobs, helping rural America, lowering the cost of farm programs because of the increased cost per bushel that our farmers are getting for their corn or for their soybeans, and again, other crops that they can plant, and uses for agricultural waste, and the efficiencies in this production process. We're right here. This is the pinnacle in which we all have to come together as a country, which I think we want to do, and make this commitment, and the innovation agenda and the commitment to energizing America by having America's farmers fueling our energy independence is right here, ready for us to take advantage of that opportunity.
Well, just so people understand, why don't you make it specific to statistics from South Dakota? How much does it contribute to the South Dakotan economy?
We have turned the corner in South Dakota, whereby we have achieved a threshold where over $1 billion has been contributed to South Dakota's economy because of the new ethanol plants that are coming online, a new biodiesel processing facility coming online, existing plants undergoing expansion. It has already created thousands of new jobs, higher paying, high skilled jobs. It's increased because it takes off the transportation costs for our farmers in delivering their corn and their soybeans, especially the corn, to the ethanol plants. Many farmer investors and cooperatives or limited liability corporations that made the decision and took all the risk a number of years ago to invest in these plants that are now able to have a diversified source of income to help them sustain these high fuel costs at a time that they're putting the plant in the ground and that they get ready to harvest it here this fall. So it has given hope to many of our rural communities. This is the economic prosperity plan that will work not just for rural America and South Dakota, but in the South, in the West, in the Northeast. This is something that truly is a win-win environmentally, economically, and energy and national security. Well, I'm glad he mentioned timber, because the emerging technologies will also allow us to generate ethanol, produce ethanol from wood waste, woody biomass. So hopefully we can address some of the issues that the caller raised, but he set out some great facts for us to remember. First of all, Henry Ford at the turn of the last century in the Model T was using alcohol, ethanol. I don't know why we ever went away from that technology and made the decision to only go with gasoline as opposed to using both sources to provide consumers the choice and have true competition between fuels that's good in bringing down the price and having flexible fuel vehicles for the last number of decades. But the other issue here is the byproducts that he mentioned from the process of producing ethanol. And that's one of the things that we have been able to dispel the myths about the energy balance of ethanol. Back in the 70s, many put out studies and have been relying on some of that same information here even recently to suggest that the energy balance of ethanol is not as good as it truly is. They haven't looked at increased yields in our corn that's being planted by our farmers across the country based on newer technologies to improve those yields. They haven't looked at increases in the technologies in the production process itself, nor did they ever take into account the wet mill and the dried distillers grains and other byproducts of this process, which, as the caller mentioned, is just, these are technologies that have allowed biorefineries to be distilleries of what were distilleries many decades ago, to result in a process to generate these biofuels and byproducts that can also be sold as feed to local livestock producers. So the benefits are enormous, and unfortunately some of them have been ignored in the past, but we're working hard, and I think we've come a long way in dispelling those myths and showing the true benefits of ethanol, biodiesel, and other biofuel. Thank you very much. I appreciate the call, and I do think this is something where I've sensed a lot of individuals in the Congress energized about our opportunities here, and I appreciate the caller's enthusiasm for the topic as well.
You are having a press conference today?
Yes, we are. Leader Nancy Pelosi, Chairman of the caucus Jim Clyburn from South Carolina, the ranking member of the House Agriculture Committee Colin Peterson, and Bob Etheridge from North Carolina and I co-chair the Rural Working Group. And we're having a press conference later this morning in which we're rolling out our plan, a very comprehensive plan that increases the production and distribution of biofuels, invests in emerging technologies, provides incentives to automakers and fuel retailers so that consumers can truly take advantage of the opportunities that we have here in the United States. We can reach this goal of energy independence, which is part of our innovation agenda, and we look forward to presenting that later on this morning.
Only a little over 35 legislative days left. Where do you expect this to go this session?
I expect it to get momentum, because I think that there are many, again, on both sides of the aisle that recognize the wisdom of this plan. There are some who would like to address this problem by lifting tariffs and put the American taxpayers in a position of subsidizing Brazilian-made ethanol, and they're having their own supply problems actually down there right now. And we have a tax credit that goes to blenders regardless of where the ethanol is derived from, whether it's produced here in Brazil. And we have no shortage of supply. We also have duty-free provisions in other of our trade agreements. So that's not the answer. That's just looking to shift our dependence on foreign oil to a dependence on foreign-produced ethanol. That's why our plan is one that I think can get momentum, and we can lay a lot of groundwork to make sure that this is part of any energy bill that comes to the House floor this year, and that we can make this law as soon as I think a lot of callers that we heard from this morning would like it to become law. Well, those are certainly issues that we're looking at, and whether some of the high costs of certain issues like fuel for American families or prescription drugs that Senator Stabenow addressed earlier today. You know, there are things that Congress is in a best position to address, and there are other issues, like you mentioned, with high rents and high property taxes that state and local government are in a best position to address. And I know you have a governor's race in Florida this year, so I sure hope that your candidates for the state legislature and governor are doing all they can to effectively address those issues and to allow you to make an informed choice in November for those issues that need to be addressed at a more local level. Well, I appreciate the caller because his point and his question really allow us to address some of the other myths that have been out there. We are increasing, based on the renewable fuel standard, the amount of ethanol that is used as a blend. Currently, the most common blend that exists in the market across the country, it's available in more markets than others, is a 10% blend. But individuals like myself and others try to take an E85 pump and the E10 pump and do our own mix, because we know that based on the cars that we drive, we can have the same type of fuel efficiency with a 20 or 30% blend that we get with a 10% blend. And a 10% blend of ethanol, the research demonstrates, has very little, if no effect on fuel performance and vehicle performance standards, and in some cases can increase that. The only reason that E85, which has a higher octane, results in diminished performance by only about 5 to 15%, other percentages are vastly exaggerated, is because the flex fuel vehicles are not optimized to E85. This is precisely why, even though back in the early part of the 19th century, Henry Ford may have gone in a different direction, although some of his quotes suggest that he saw the potential for ethanol to be far greater based on emerging technologies. We have those technologies today that it can improve vehicle performance, and that can also improve the production efficiencies to lower the cost of production. Right now, in places in the upper Great Plains, you can produce ethanol far more efficiently than it costs in terms of cost of production for gasoline. So the times have changed dramatically over the last 80 to 90 years, and I think that it is something that we can vastly improve the percentage of where we are with ethanol in the country now based on these new technologies, based on engines that are optimized to run on these biofuels.